The house always felt different when Sarah, Emily's mother, left for her business trips. Usually, her laughter filled the rooms, her voice tying everything together, making their home feel alive. But that Friday evening, as the front door closed behind her and her suitcase rolled away into the waiting cab, silence settled like a heavy blanket. Emily stood by the window, watching her mother disappear down the street. Then turned to see her father, Michael, standing a few steps behind her. He gave a small, awkward smile, the kind that said he wasn't sure what to do with himself now that it was just the two of them. Emily was 21, still living at home while finishing her last year of college. Most of the time she loved having her parents around, but when her mother left, something inside her shifted. The house felt colder, emptier, and her father's presence became strangely sharper. Like she noticed things she didn't want to notice. He wasn't cruel or distant in a harsh way, but he carried a quiet sadness that seemed louder without her mother around. That night, she curled on the couch with a blanket, scrolling through her phone. When Michael appeared with 2 glasses of red wine, he held them carefully, almost nervously. "Your mom always says this is good for the soul," he said softly, handing one to her. She hesitated. Drinking wine with her father wasn't something they normally did, but she took it, not wanting to seem rude. The moment felt strange, but oddly warm, too. The movie he chose wasn't anything special. Just an old romantic drama he said her mother loved when they were younger. They sat side by side, not touching. But Emily couldn't help but notice the small details, how he laughed at certain scenes, how his eyes softened when he looked at her. It wasn't wrong, but it wasn't normal either. The quiet between them wasn't the usual silence of father and daughter. It carried something else, something heavy. Almost like an unspoken question neither dared to ask. Emily tried to focus on the movie, but her mind wandered. She thought about how her parents had been married for over 20 years, yet sometimes they seemed more like roommates than lovers. Her mother was always busy, always traveling, always distracted. Her father worked long hours but never complained. And in that living room, with the wine warming her chest, she realized how lonely he must have been at one point. Michael leaned forward to pour more wine, and his arm brushed against hers. It was nothing, a small accident, but Emily felt her pulse quicken. He apologized quickly, his voice low, almost embarrassed, and then gave her a look she couldn't quite read. For a second, she wondered if she imagined it all. She was just being silly. But deep down, she knew something had shifted. The rest of the night passed in soft words and shared glances. When the movie ended, neither of them moved to turn off the TV right away. They just sat there, quiet, letting the credits roll. Emily felt a strange pull, a closeness that shouldn't have been there. It wasn't spoken, it wasn't touched. But it lingered. When she finally went upstairs to bed, her mind replayed the small details, the wine, the laughter, the way his eyes seemed sad and searching. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if tomorrow would feel the same, or if she would convince herself she had only imagined the change. But deep down, she already knew. Something had begun in that silence, something neither of them could easily ignore. The next morning, Emily woke to the smell of pancakes drifting through the house. It was unusual. Normally, her mother cooked breakfast, while her father rushed out early for work or sat quietly with his coffee. But today, Michael stood in the kitchen, humming to himself, flipping pancakes like he hadn't done in years. Emily blinked in surprise, almost not recognizing the man in front of her. He looked younger somehow, lighter, as if the silence of the house had given him permission to be someone different. "Morning, Keto," he said, setting a plate in front of her. His voice carried a cheerfulness she hadn't heard in months. She smiled awkwardly, sitting down. The first bite was warm and sweet, and they both laughed when he admitted he always burned the first one. For a while, it felt like they were just father and daughter sharing breakfast. But underneath there was something else, something neither of them could name, flowing quietly between the words. Later that day, they sat outside on the porch. The sun stretched across the yard, painting everything in golden light. Emily leaned against the railing with a notebook in her lap, trying to finish her assignments. Michael sat in the chair beside her, sipping coffee. Instead of scrolling his phone like usual, he started talking. His words came slowly at first, then poured out like water breaking through a dam. He told her about his college days, how he once wanted to write novels but gave it up for a stable career. He described the night he met her mother at a campus dance, how she'd worn a red dress that made her stand out in the crowd. He laughed at the memory, but there was sadness hiding in the corners of his voice. Emily listened quietly, her pen frozen above her paper. Then his story shifted. He talked about marriage, about how life had a way of turning dreams into routines. "Your mom and I. We love each other," he said, staring into the distance. "But sometimes I feel like she doesn't really see me anymore." His tone cracked just slightly, as if he regretted letting the words slip out. Emily's chest tightened. She had noticed it too, the way her parents' conversations were more like schedules than affection. The way her mother's absences stretched longer each year. For the first time, she saw her father not as the steady figure in her life, but as a man who carried quiet loneliness in his heart. Without thinking, she placed her hand over his, trying to comfort him. It was meant to be simple, a gesture of care, but the moment felt heavier than that. His hand didn't move away. Instead, his thumb brushed lightly across her skin, a soft motion that made her breath catch. It lasted only a second, but in that second the world seemed to pause. Emily pulled her hand back quickly, pretending to adjust her notebook, her cheeks warm. Michael cleared his throat, pretending nothing had happened, but his eyes lingered on her longer than they should have. As the afternoon faded, they talked more, but every word carried a new tension. It wasn't dangerous yet, but it was close. She saw his vulnerability, and he saw her kindness. And together it created a closeness that felt fragile and forbidden. When evening came, Emily went to her room, her heart pounding. She told herself she had only been kind, only listened, only cared. But when she remembered the way his thumb brushed her skin, she knew it was more than that. Something had shifted again, deeper this time. And she didn't know how to stop it. She sat on her bed, staring at the wall, realizing the truth. The silence in the house was no longer empty. It was filled with something dangerous, something waiting to grow. That night, the house was too quiet again. Emily tried to keep herself busy. She sat in the living room with a book open in her lap, though she barely read a single page. Her father's footsteps echoed upstairs, then faded, then returned. He was restless. She could feel it. Finally, he came down carrying a half-empty bottle of wine. His voice was calm but carried something underneath when he said, "Mind if I sit with you?" She nodded, though her chest tightened. He poured 2 glasses, setting one in front of her. This time she didn't hesitate. She sipped slowly, her eyes on the flickering light of the TV. The air between them grew heavier with every passing minute. They weren't watching the movie. They were waiting, though, for what? Emily wasn't sure. Their conversation started harmless. He asked about her classes, her future plans, her friends. She answered, trying to keep her tone light. But then the questions deepened. He asked if she'd ever been in love. She blushed, shrugging, and admitted she wasn't sure. He laughed softly, but there was no humor in his eyes. "Love's a complicated thing," he said, swirling his glass. The words led to more. He spoke about how love changes, how sometimes 2 people can live in the same house but feel like strangers. His voice trembled as he said it, and Emily realized he was talking about her mother. She wanted to comfort him, to say something kind, but her words stuck in her throat. Instead, she listened, her heart aching at the honesty in his tone. Then it happened. He reached across the small space between them, tucking a strand of her hair behind her ear. It was such a simple gesture, but it felt too intimate, too careful, too filled with meaning. Emily froze, her breath shallow. His hand lingered just a second longer than it should have. His eyes locked on hers. Her pulse quickened. She knew it was wrong. She knew this wasn't what a father should do. Yet there was no anger in her, only confusion, a pull she couldn't explain. She searched his face for answers, but what she saw made her chest a loneliness, regret, and something else, something forbidden. "Emily," he whispered, her name breaking apart in his voice. It was barely a word, more like a confession. She turned her face away, her hands gripping the book tightly. She wanted to move, to run, but her body wouldn't listen. But the moment hung in the air, too sharp, too fragile. Finally, she stood, her legs unsteady. "I should go to bed," she said quickly, her voice almost trembling. Michael nodded, but his eyes followed her as she walked toward the stairs. He didn't stop her, didn't call her back, but the silence behind her was louder than any words. Upstairs, Emily closed her bedroom door and leaned against it, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. She pressed her hand to her chest, trying to calm herself, but nothing worked. Her mind replayed everything: the brush of his hand, the look in his eyes, the sound of her name on his lips. She crawled into bed, burying her face in the pillow. She told herself nothing had happened. Nothing. But the truth was, something had. It wasn't physical, but it was real. The line that once seemed solid had blurred in a single moment. As she lay there in the dark, she realized life would never feel the same. That night had changed everything. The silence of the house was no longer safe. It carried secrets now, heavy ones that neither of them could erase. The morning light slipped through Emily's window, but it did nothing to chase away the heaviness in her chest. She got dressed quickly, avoiding her mirror. Downstairs, she found her father already at the table, coffee steaming in front of him. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept. Their eyes met, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The memory of last night hung between them, sharp and fragile. Finally, Michael cleared his throat. "Emily, about yesterday." His voice broke as though the words were too heavy. "I shouldn't have." He stopped, staring at his coffee, his face red with shame. Emily gripped her mug, her fingers trembling. "I know," she whispered. Her voice came out soft, but it carried more than she wanted. She wasn't angry. She wasn't scared. She was caught somewhere between longing and heartbreak, wishing she didn't feel the way she did. Breakfast passed in silence. Every sound, the clink of the spoon, the scrape of the chair, felt louder than normal. Emily wanted to run, but she couldn't. She wanted to forget, but the memory of his hand brushing her hair, the way he whispered her name, stayed burned in her mind. The rest of the day dragged. They stayed in separate rooms, both pretending to be busy, both avoiding what sat unspoken between them. By evening, Emily's mother returned home. The sound of her car in the driveway snapped Emily out of her haze. She rushed to the door to help with the suitcase, her smile stiff. Her hug too tight. Her mother kissed her cheek, then greeted Michael with a warmth that felt rehearsed. Emily stood back and watched them. To anyone else, they looked like a normal couple, tired from years together but still intact. But Emily saw the truth. Their embrace was polite, their words careful, their distance unmistakable. That night at dinner, conversation flowed awkwardly. Sarah talked about her meetings in Chicago, how exhausting the trip had been. Michael nodded, asked questions, but his eyes didn't shine. Emily barely touched her food, her thoughts drowning in the storm of what had almost happened. Later, alone in her room, she replayed everything in her head. It was not just about the touch. It was the longing behind it, the way two lonely hearts had found each other in the silence. She understood it now. Infidelity didn't always mean an affair. Sometimes it was a glance held too long, a word spoken too softly, a moment that carried more weight than it should. The days turned into weeks. Life returned to routine on the surface, but nothing was the same. Michael never crossed the line again. He avoided being alone with her too long, kept conversations short, careful. But his eyes betrayed him, full of guilt, full of something that wouldn't fade. Emily, too, carried the memory in silence, never telling a soul, holding it like a secret that burned but couldn't be released. Every time her mother left for another trip, Emily felt the tension return. But Michael kept his distance, guarding himself. She respected that, even though part of her still remembered the closeness of that night. It lived in her chest like a scar hidden, but always there. In time, Emily grew older, moved out, built her own life. But she carried the memory with her, not as a scandal, but as a story of love misplaced. A story of how loneliness could twist hearts, of how silence could turn into something dangerous. She never blamed him fully. She knew he was a man who had needed to be seen, and for a brief moment he had seen her, years later. She would look back and know that night changed her. It showed her how fragile love could be, how quickly lines could blur, how silence could hold more than words. And though nothing ever truly happened, everything had already happened. It was their secret, their shadow. Emily never forgot the night her father almost broke her heart. And in that memory lived the quiet truth of infidelity, always in actions but in feelings that should never have been shared.